The year is 1972. Robert James "Bobby" Fischer, the fiercely individualistic American grandmaster, was facing Soviet world champion Boris Spassky in Reykjavik, Iceland, in what was dubbed the match of the century.
But here's the thing, this was never just a game. It was a global spectacle, the entire Cold War distilled onto a single chessboard. You had Boris Spassky, the polished, state-supported champion from a chess empire. And then you had Bobby Fischer, unpredictable, brilliant, and completely, utterly alone. The stakes were just massive. We're talking about a battle for psychological and ideological supremacy.
Okay, let's really unpack this, because this contrast is at the heart of the entire story. This was the ultimate David and Goliath, the individualist versus the state machine. Fischer was the embodiment of a kind of radical American self-reliance, a lone genius up against the massive, collaborative, state-funded Soviet system. The Soviets had entire teams of grandmasters, huge libraries of analysis, decades of institutional knowledge. And Fischer? He had himself, his board, and this singular, all-consuming obsession.
So, how in the world did one man manage to dismantle an entire empire? Well, to figure that out, we've got to decode his method. We'll start with the match that made him a legend, but then we're going to go deeper. How was this solitary genius even created in the first place? What was his core philosophy, what we're calling the Fischer Principle, that drove him? How did he turn that big idea into a relentless day-to-day system? And of course, how can we maybe take that blueprint for mastery and apply it to our own lives?
To really understand how Fischer won, we have to rewind. We need to get a handle on the man himself and the chaotic world that created his insane drive for perfection.
Fischer's childhood was, to put it mildly, a mess. It was chaotic, unstable, and so, in a world that he couldn't control at all, he found this perfect universe of logic and order inside those 64 squares. For him, chess wasn't just a game, it was his sanctuary. It was a place where the rules were absolute, where your effort was directly tied to your results, and where you could find the truth through sheer force of will. And that deep, psychological need for order, that became the fuel for his obsession.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Think about the challenge he was up against. He was facing an information superpower. The Soviet Union had a complete monopoly on advanced chess theory, and it was all published in Russian. So what does Fischer do? He just systematically erases their advantage. He teaches himself Russian. Why? So he could read their books and consume their knowledge directly. By the time he's 14, he'd reportedly memorized every important chess book he could find. His isolation wasn't a weakness, he weaponized it. It became his own private, high-intensity lab for figuring out the absolute truth of the game.
And from that solitary, intense period of study, a whole philosophy started to take shape. A systematic, no-compromise code for achieving total dominance in any competitive field. This is the Fischer Principle. Here's the core belief, and it's simple but profound. Mastery isn't something you do, it's something you are. For Fischer, there was no separation. The game was life. This wasn't a job or a hobby, it was a constant state of being. It demanded this relentless commitment, a complete fusion of his identity with his craft, where pretty much every waking moment was spent deepening his understanding.
The first pillar of his principle is what I'm calling the Information Monarchy Mandate. This wasn't just about showing up prepared. No, it was about achieving absolute, total knowledge superiority. He believed in studying opening theory so deeply that his opponents would feel psychologically crushed before the middle game even got going. For him, knowledge wasn't just defense, it was his #1 weapon.
The second pillar was the Flawless Endgame Doctrine. You know, a lot of players focus on the flashy tactical openings and middle games. Fischer believed the true test of mastery, the ultimate measure of a player's genius, was the endgame. He systematically drilled this phase of the game until his technique was like a machine, just precise, inevitable, and absolutely soul-crushing for anyone sitting across from him. It was all about grinding them down and just breaking their will to fight back.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates pillar number 3, the comprehensive physical conditioning rule. Fischer was one of the very first to treat chess like a real athletic event. He got that these marathon games lasting 6, 7, even 8 hours weren't just mental battles. They were tests of pure physical endurance. So intense physical training, swimming, tennis, lifting weights, that was his secret weapon to sustain immense psychological pressure and keep his mind clear for deep calculations right when his opponents were getting exhausted and making mistakes.
So here's the crucial part. These 3 pillars created a complete, holistic system.
See, it wasn't just about being smart, it was about being the most knowledgeable, the most technically precise, and the most physically durable player at the table. It was a systematic way to build an unbeatable competitor.
But hey, a philosophy is just talk without action, right? So let's look at how Fischer actually turned this principle, this obsession, into a concrete, repeatable, daily system. How did he actually live this code? He basically developed this primary mental training system we can call the solitary internalization and total recall routine. And the name says it all, right? It was about forcing the game so deep into his mind that it just became part of his subconscious, ready to be called up in an instant. Just take a second and really think about what this means. He practiced constant, boardless study. He would analyze incredibly complicated positions in super long variations entirely in his head. And he did this while walking down the street, while eating a meal, while doing pretty much anything else. The whole point was to eliminate mental downtime. He was systematically programming his brain to make chess his default state of consciousness. His mind was always on the board. His second core habit was just as systematic, the opening-to-endgame Symmetry Check. From the very first move he made, he wasn't just thinking about the opening. He was already visualizing the pawn structure and the piece activity that would lead to a winning endgame dozens of moves down the line. He was like an architect, designing his games from start to finish, making sure there were no weak links, just a seamless flow toward victory.
So now let's go back to Reykjavik, 1972. When you finally understand Fischer's system, his total physical, mental, and informational dominance, his victory starts to look less like some shocking upset and more like the inevitable result of a far superior process.
And this timeline, this just drives home the sheer scale of what he was up against. I mean, look at this. For 24 straight years, the World Chess Championship was the exclusive property of the Soviet Union. Botvinnik, Smyslov, Tal, Petrosyan, Spassky, an unbroken dynasty of champions, all backed by the full might of a state. People thought it was an unbreakable wall.
And then came Fischer, one man. Through sheer systematic, obsessive work, he became the one who broke the machine. He single-handedly brought a quarter-century of dominance to a crashing halt. It was an absolute earthquake in the world of sports, and really in geopolitics.
And his legacy is just profound. He changed chess forever. He brought a level of uncompromising professionalism that the game had never seen before. Because of him, meticulous, super deep opening preparation became the standard. Physical fitness went from a novelty to a non-negotiable part of elite training. But I think, most importantly, he provided the ultimate proof. That one single, dedicated person, through systematic and obsessive immersion, could defeat the largest, most powerful collective imaginable.
Okay, so why does any of this matter to us right now? Because if you look past the chessboard, Fischer's story gives us a universal blueprint for achieving mastery in pretty much any field. We can actually distill his life's work into a lesson we can act on.
And that leads us to the big question for you. How do you build your own information monarchy? It all starts by figuring out what the absolute core knowledge is in your field. Not the latest trends, not the fluff, but the foundational principles. What are the Russian chess books of your industry? Your job is to find them, devour them, and make their knowledge your own.
Here is the core takeaway. We talk all the time about work-life balance, but the Fischer Principle suggests that for true mastery, maybe the goal is work-life fusion. It's not about working all the time. It's about becoming so immersed in your craft that the line between learning and living just blurs. It means systematically committing to knowing your field so deeply that it becomes second nature. It's about making your pursuit not just what you do, but a fundamental part of who you are.
In the end, Bobby Fischer built his dominance on the profound truth that genius is really just a measure of committed attention. The Fischer Principle gave us a systematic blueprint to master that obsession, to master the game through solitary rigor and information superiority. And it all boils down to an immutable rule. The most powerful engine for genius is, and always will be, a relentless obsession.